It is May 1st, 2020, and this might be the last video I do for y'all because I do have to go back to work soon. No comment there. So because it is May 1st, it is May Day, which means it is Beltane. So I thought I'd do a fun little video for you of how to make lavender tea cakes. I love baking with lavender. It's a great flavor to anything as long as you don't go crazy with it, but unlike rose, it's a lot lighter, so it's very hard to overpower what you're making. So I'm going to make them in these cute little bundt pans, but if you have a 12 count muffin tin, you can use that instead, as long as you coat it really well, you know, with a spray. That's my oven. With a spray or some melted butter and sugar so that it doesn't stick. It's whatever works better for you. I just thought these would be really cute. And after it is nice and cooled off, we're going to add a honey glaze on top. So something very nice and springy and fun to celebrate the holiday. So without further ado, I have my recipe in front of me so I don't forget what I'm talking about. And let me run through the ingredients for you real quick. So for starters, we're going to have 2/3 of a cup of sugar. We're going to have 6 tablespoons of butter softened, or more if you're going to brush your pan with it. We're going to have a cup of all-purpose flour, half a teaspoon of salt, half a teaspoon of baking powder, a 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda, a 1/4 cup of buttermilk. If you don't have buttermilk, you can have regular milk, almost filled completely to the 1/4 cup line, and just add vinegar to it and let it sit for about 10 minutes so that it can sour and get kind of clumpy and gross looking. We are going to have a 1½ teaspoons of our dried lavender, which I had a bunch lying around, so I went ahead and crushed it so that it's a little bit finer and doesn't stick all together in the mix. As coarsely chopped as possible is best, and yes, it does have to be dried. We're going to have a teaspoon of vanilla and then 2 eggs. For the glaze later on, you are going to need a cup of powdered sugar, 2 tablespoons of honey, and 2 tablespoons of milk, but we'll run through that after everything's already baked off and dried. So without further ado, let's do this. Be a good break from all the Sopranos I've been binge watching for a month now. So I'm going to go ahead and spray my pans. My oven has been set to 325 with the rack in the center of the oven. Make sure this is generous because there's a lot of sugar in this. We don't want it sticking and wasting all of it. Alright, so we're going to start with our flour next. I already have my cup in there, so next we're going to add in our salt, all of our dry mixture basically, except for the lavender. So we're going to add our ½ teaspoon of salt. There we go. We're going to do the ½ teaspoon of the baking powder. There we go. The 1/4 teaspoon of the baking soda. Don't get those two mixed up. And we're going to whisk it, which I forgot to grab. Whisk. And then we're going to have our wet ingredients. So then we're going to have that buttermilk. Which was a 1/4 cup of buttermilk. Nice and chunky and gross looking. We're going to have that 1.5 teaspoons of the lavender. Which smells so good. And we're going to have vanilla, which was 1 teaspoon, but as I've mentioned before, this is the strong stuff, so I'm going to just do half. Do a quick whisk to get all that lavender incorporated. And set that aside. Alright, this is where we're going to add the 6 tablespoons of butter to our mixer. Let me move these out of the way for you. You can do this with a hand mixer, it doesn't matter, it's just what I prefer. And then we're also going to have that 2/3 of a cup of plain sugar. And we're basically just going to beat this until it's pale and fluffy. About 3 minutes on medium high or whatever works for you. So let's give it a go. So I think it's looking pretty good. Make sure you grab that rubber spatula. I've mentioned it many times before. Go ahead and scrape all of it off of your paddle. Don't want to miss anything. Scrape your sides. And we're going to do this in alternating steps, about 5 altogether. Starting with your dry mixture, you're going to add it about 1/3 of it into the bowl. Put that paddle back on. And we're just going to beat this on low until it's incorporated, because we don't want to overdo this. Okay. Now we're going to add half of our wet mixture. Do the same thing. And basically repeat. Flour, wet, flour. And then we're just going to mix it for a little bit just to make sure it's all together. Scrape the side. We're going to add the other egg. I can hear my mom in the sewing room making her masks. I think she's watching the birdcage. Okay, so again, you don't want to overdo it, just until it's all together. Our mixture is going to be very light in color, as you can see. A little goopy, not too stiff, because again, you don't want to overwork it. It's going to be very tough. Now, this is where you would add it to your muffin tins if that's what you're using, but again, using bundt pans. I'm only going to fill this about 2/3 of the way full. I've never used this recipe, so I don't want them to overflow. So just add that in, and then we're going to bake. And for those of you who are not familiar with Beltane, or May Day as I speak of, this is just one of the many holidays celebrated around the world, usually in pagan beliefs. But essentially, it's what you see when you have all these festivals and people are dancing around the maypole. It is a way to celebrate the coming of spring, of basically the time of life beginning again after a long winter. This is when we would plant our crops. It's when, you know, animals are doing their thing to make more animals, hence the maypole. I'm not going to explain that. And it's just a really fun time to enjoy the freshness of spring. If you have any fresh ingredients at home, you would make, you know, like nice salads. Lavender and honey and lemon are usually the go-to flavors. See what I mean? Not too full. If you have any crops that have already sprung up from a winter harvest, I don't particularly have anything right now other than a couple sprigs of lavender, which I'm leaving for the bees. It's really not worth it. So this is going to give me about 3 of these mini bunts, which is fine. That's how many I need. But for you, you should have enough to have your 12 small cakes. If you feel like you're not going to have enough, maybe just only fill up your muffin tins halfway. Okay, these are all good to go. I'm going to grab a pan. Just in case if they do overflow, put them on, put them in the center of your pan, and we're going to bake this for about 15 minutes. If you feel like your oven doesn't cook thoroughly, maybe stop halfway through that 15 minutes, rotate your pans, and finish off. We're looking for golden, springy, and delicious. So let's see what I do. So because my little bundt pans were much more full than a normal muffin tin, I actually had to put it in for an extra 10 minutes. I've already taken them out. As you can see, they're pretty overflowed. I actually burrowed a little hole where the bundt pan middle comes through. So basically I went around the edge and in the center, and it popped right out. I was actually pretty happy. So I've got these sitting on a cooling rack for now, and make sure you only let these sit for about 10 minutes to cool before you pop them out of your tin. You don't want them to get that sugar solidified and have them stick to the pan too much. Let's see if we can get this one out. Here we go. I'm actually pretty impressed that worked. You're welcome to make the glaze now and go ahead and pour it over if you want it to kind of be absorbed into the cake more. But because I want it to have that nice white coating, I'm going to wait till it's completely cooled off. So I'm going to give it about 30 minutes just to be safe, and then we'll come back and make that glaze and make it really pretty. Okay. Okay. So they're all nice and cool. No heat to it whatsoever. So I'm going to go ahead and make this glaze real quick, and then we're going to pour it on and make it look pretty. So let's go ahead and start with the cup of powdered sugar. Now, just like a lot of the glazes that you make for bundt cakes or tea loaves, you might need a little bit more liquid if it's not the consistency that you would like. But let's just start with what it tells us. So we've got the cup of powdered sugar. We're going to do 2 tablespoons of the honey. And then 2 tablespoons of milk. Okay. Let's see what that does. Again, never done this recipe, so this may not be the consistency we need, but let's find out. It's a little spackly. I think it'll be okay. Because we don't want this running all over the place. We want to save as much of it for the cake as we can. So, as you can see, it's kind of like the consistency of Elmer's glue. Enough to pour, but not so thin that it's going to drip right off. So let's get a little baby spatula. We'll add a little bit on top. Start with a small amount. I'll let it run down the side. That was way too much. Okay. Add some more to that. It's okay if it's not perfect. It's gonna fill in the center for you too. So you'll have kind of like a fun little pocket of icing. See? They kind of look like sweet rolls, as in, did somebody steal your sweet roll? Now I have a little bit of leftover the lavender from earlier, so while this is still kind of wet, I'm going to sprinkle some on top. There you go. If you have full sprigs, if you think that'd be a little bit more aesthetically pleasing, like these, you could put one on top, you know, have a little fancy show. And there we go. Very easy. I can smell the lavender. I tasted the cake earlier and it is delicious. And with this honey glaze, it's going to be just enough sweet, but not so much that it's going to give you a toothache. So, that's it. Enjoy the rest of your holiday, your May Day, your Beltane, whatever you want to call it. Go out there, dance around the maypole, pick some flowers, frolic naked, whatever works for you. In the meantime, be safe out there, have fun, and maybe I'll see you next time. Maybe not. Bye.